A girl got lost in a national park, but 72 hours later, search dogs lead the rescuers to an underground passage that reveals something unexpected. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The buzzing of Jessica Thompson's phone interrupted the hushed atmosphere of the design studio meeting. She glanced down at the device resting on the table, initially planning to ignore it. Client presentations weren't the time for distractions, and as lead designer, she needed to maintain her focus on the architectural renderings spread across the sleek conference table. But something made her pick up the phone. Perhaps it was maternal instinct, or maybe just the unusual timing of a call during school hours. The sight of the school's name on her screen sent a small jolt of concern through her body. "I'm sorry," she said to the room of expectant clients and colleagues. "I need to take this. It might be about my daughter." Jessica stepped into the hallway, pressing the phone to her ear. "Hello? This is Jessica Thompson." The words that followed demolished her world in an instant. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Principal Garner. I'm afraid I have some concerning news about Emily." His voice was carefully measured, the tone of someone trained to deliver bad news without causing panic. He failed. "She's been reported missing from a school field trip to Redwood National Park. She's been separated from her group for approximately 3 hours now." The hallway seemed to tilt beneath Jessica's feet. "Missing? What do you mean missing?" Her voice rose sharply. "How does a child go missing on a school trip?" "The Rangers are already organizing search parties," the principal continued. "But we needed to notify you immediately. The teachers have been looking, but 3 hours. Jessica's mind raced with horrible possibilities. She's been missing for 3 hours and I'm just being notified now. The teachers initially thought she had simply fallen behind the group. When they realized she was truly missing, they immediately alerted park rangers and... Jessica wasn't listening anymore. Emily, her quiet, anxious 12-year-old who had begged not to go on this trip, was alone somewhere in the vast wilderness of Redwood National Park. The park, with its massive ancient trees, steep ravines, and miles of rugged terrain. The park Jessica had insisted Emily visit because it would be good for her to socialize more. Jessica stumbled back into the conference room, her face drained of color. She bumped against the table, sending her coffee cup toppling. Dark liquid spread across the pristine architectural drawings, but she barely noticed. "I have to go," she announced to the startled room. "My daughter is missing." 20 minutes later, Jessica was in her car, speeding down the highway while repeatedly dialing her husband's number. Michael was at an architectural conference 2 hours away in San Francisco. He finally answered on the 4th attempt. "Jess, I'm in the middle of a presentation. Can I..." "Emily's missing." The words came out as a strangled sob. "She wandered away from her group at Redwood. They've been searching for 3 hours already." The silence on the other end lasted only a second before Michael's voice returned, tense and focused. "I'm leaving now. Where are you?" "Driving to the park. I'm taking Highway 101. Michael, what if she's..." "Don't!" His voice was sharp. "Don't go there. She's smart. She knows basic survival. We'll find her." Jessica pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing well beyond the speed limit. As she drove, memories ambushed her from all sides. Emily at breakfast that morning, picking at her cereal, her face a mask of dread. "Please don't make me go," she had whispered. "Nobody will notice if I'm not there." Jessica had sighed, frustrated by what she saw as another attempt to avoid social interaction. "Emily, we've discussed this. You need to make an effort to connect with your classmates. Your science teacher specifically recommended you for this geology field trip." "They don't care about rocks," Emily had mumbled. "They just laugh when I talk about my collection." "You need to try harder to fit in," Jessica had insisted, checking her watch and gathering her portfolio. "This trip is mandatory, and it's an opportunity. Sometimes you have to step outside your comfort zone. The memory now felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Had she actually said those words? Had she really been so dismissive of her daughter's obvious distress? Traffic slowed to a crawl near an accident, and Jessica pounded the steering wheel in frustration. Every minute counted. She knew from her own childhood camping trips how vast and disorienting those forests could be, how quickly the temperature dropped after sunset. And Emily, sensitive, easily overwhelmed Emily, how would she cope alone in that environment? By the time Jessica reached the park's visitor center, it was past 3 in the afternoon. The parking lot was crowded with ranger vehicles, a police car, and the school bus that had brought Emily's class. She barely remembered to put her car in park before leaping out and running toward the building. Inside, she found a scene of controlled chaos. Teachers huddled in worried conversation, while rangers spread maps across tables and coordinated via radio. A group of subdued students sat on benches along one wall, some crying, others staring blankly ahead. Jessica spotted the school principal and rushed over. Where was she last seen? What was she wearing? Has anyone found anything? Principal Garner raised his hands in a calming gesture. Mrs. Thompson, this is Ranger Wilson, the search coordinator. The ranger was a weathered man in his 50s with lines etched deeply around his eyes. He nodded at Jessica, with a grim expression that suggested he'd done this too many times before. Mrs. Thompson, we have 4 teams already in the field, he explained in a voice that was both gentle and authoritative. Emily was last seen during the stop at Cathedral Trees Trail. The group was observing rock formations at several points, and between the second and third stop, her absence was noticed. She was alone. No buddy system. Jessica's accusation was directed at the geology teacher, who had approached their small group. Students were in groups of 4, Mr. Landry explained, unable to meet her eyes. The others thought she had moved to another group when they transitioned to the next site. It wasn't until the full class regrouped that we realized, so nobody was actually watching her. Jessica's voice shook with anger and fear. Ranger Wilson stepped in smoothly. Every minute counts now. Let's focus on finding Emily. Can you tell me about her? Would she deliberately wander off? Does she have any experience outdoors? Before Jessica could answer, the visitor center door swung open and Michael burst in, his face flushed from running. He crossed the room in long strides and wrapped Jessica in a brief, fierce hug before turning to the ranger. My daughter knows basic wilderness safety, he said. She's not particularly athletic, but she's extremely intelligent. She's interested in geology, which is why she was on this trip. Michael hesitated, then added in a lower voice, she's been having some trouble with bullying recently. It's possible she might have deliberately separated herself if she was feeling overwhelmed. Jessica stared at her husband. You think she's hiding? I'm saying it's a possibility we should consider. Michael's tone was defensive. She might not be lost. She might be avoiding being found. This new perspective hit Jessica like a slap. Had things gotten so bad that Emily would prefer being alone in a dangerous forest to staying with her classmates? I want to join the search, Jessica announced, turning to Ranger Wilson. Mrs. Thompson, I understand your desire to help, but we have trained professionals. She's my daughter, I'm going. Jessica's tone left no room for debate. I need to be out there looking for her. That's not advisable, another ranger interjected. We have protocols. I don't care about your protocols. Jessica's voice rose, drawing stares from across the room. My 12-year-old is out there alone because these teachers failed to watch her properly. I'm not sitting here waiting for updates. Michael placed a restraining hand on her arm. Jess, the rangers know what they're doing. We might just get in the way. She rounded on him, jerking her arm free. How can you say that? This is Emily we're talking about, our daughter who begged not to come on this trip. and I forced her. I put her in this situation." "You didn't cause this," Michael said, but his eyes told a different story. "But pushing her to socialize when she clearly wasn't ready. Oh, so now this is my fault? At least I don't coddle her so much she can't function in normal social situations." Ranger Wilson stepped between them. "This isn't helping Emily," he said firmly. "Mrs. Thompson, if you insist on joining the search, you'll need to follow explicit instructions from your team leader. Mr. Thompson, we could use your help coordinating from here. You know your daughter's habits, what might attract her attention." As the sun began its descent behind the towering redwoods, casting long shadows across the visitor center, the search intensified. Jessica found herself tramping through fern-covered forest floors with 3 rangers, calling Emily's name until her voice grew hoarse. The massive trees seemed to swallow their shouts, the dense canopy already turning the forest floor prematurely dark. "Emily! Emily!" Jessica's calls grew increasingly desperate as daylight waned. "We should head back," the lead ranger finally said. "Other teams will continue with night equipment, but—" "No," Jessica interrupted. "I'm not leaving these woods without my daughter." The ranger's radio crackled with a transmission that made everyone freeze. "Base to Team Charlie. We've found a backpack approximately half a mile northeast of your position, pink with butterfly patches. Can you confirm if this matches the missing child's description?" Jessica's heart leaped. "That's hers! That's Emily's backpack!" They changed direction, moving as quickly as safety allowed through the gathering darkness. When they reached the site, another search team had already secured the area. Emily's purple backpack rested against a cluster of rocks that jutted from the hillside. Jessica rushed forward and grabbed it, frantically unzipping the main compartment. Inside were Emily's water bottle, her lunchbox, and her prized geology book. With trembling hands, Jessica opened the thick textbook, expecting to find it intact, a clue perhaps forgotten in panic. What she found instead sent a chill through her body. Pages had been carefully torn out, not ripped in haste or fear, but deliberately removed along the binding. Flipping through the book, she found detailed notes written in Emily's neat handwriting across the margins of remaining pages. References to rock formations, coordinates, and observations about the forest terrain. "These don't look like the notes of someone who's lost or scared," Ranger Wilson said quietly, examining the book over Jessica's shoulder. "These look methodical, planned." Jessica stared at the carefully annotated pages, the deliberately removed sections, and the small hand-drawn maps in the margins. The terrible realization dawned on her. Emily hadn't gotten lost while running away from something. She had been exploring with a purpose. Jessica stared at the neatly annotated pages and meticulously removed sections of Emily's geology book, her mind reeling with implications. This wasn't the hasty abandonment of a frightened child. These were the calculated actions of someone with purpose, with intent. The darkness of the forest pressed in around them as Ranger Wilson carefully bagged the backpack for evidence. "We need to get back to the visitor center," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's too dark to continue safely, and this new information needs to be analyzed properly." Jessica reluctantly followed the rangers back through the darkened forest, her flashlight beam bouncing off ancient trunks that seemed to watch her with silent judgment. Each step away from where they'd found the backpack felt like betrayal. Emily was still out there somewhere. By the time they reached the visitor center, it was well past midnight. Most of the students had been sent home, but a core group of rangers, volunteers, and staff remained, their faces drawn with exhaustion. Michael sprang to his feet when Jessica entered, hope and fear battling across his features. "You found her backpack," he said, eyeing the plastic evidence bag. "But not—" "No," Jessica cut him off, unable to bear hearing him complete the sentence. "Not Emily. Just this." Rain began to patter against the windows of the visitor center, light at first, then gaining momentum. The sound filled the heavy silence as Ranger Wilson spread the contents of Emily's backpack across a table. Jessica removed the geology book with its missing pages and opened it to show Michael. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the detailed notes in the margins. She wasn't running away in panic. She was studying something. Michael examined the notations, his architect's eye recognizing the precision in their daughter's observations. "Possible calcite formation west of marked point on map," he read aloud. "Cross-reference with Professor Landon's thesis on undocumented cave systems." His eyes met Jessica's. "Cave systems? What is she talking about?" The rain increased in intensity, drumming against the roof of the visitor center. A ranger approaching from the communications desk looked grim. "Weather report just came in. We're looking at heavy rainfall throughout the night and into tomorrow. This complicates things for the search dogs." Jessica felt a fresh wave of panic. Rain would wash away scents, obscure tracks, and make the already treacherous forest floor more dangerous. And if Emily was out there, exposed to the elements, "She has to have shelter," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "She's smart. She would have found somewhere dry." Ranger Wilson had been examining Emily's notes with growing interest. He looked up with an expression Jessica couldn't quite read. "Your daughter has the mind of a scientist," he said, pointing to a particularly detailed diagram. "These aren't random observations. She's documenting specific geological features with remarkable precision for a child her age." "She's been obsessed with geology since she was 8, Michael explained. "She can name rock formations most adults have never heard of. We thought it was just a phase, but—" "Check this," Jessica interrupted. Having discovered something tucked into the inner lining of the backpack, she carefully extracted a small, leather-bound notebook, its edges worn from frequent handling. She held it up, hesitating. "It's her personal diary," she said, meeting Michael's eyes. "Should we—" "If there's any information that could help us find her, we need to know," Michael replied firmly, though his expression betrayed his discomfort at violating their daughter's privacy. Jessica nodded and opened the diary with trembling hands. The first few entries were what one might expect from a 12-year-old. Observations about school, complaints about homework, detailed descriptions of rock specimens she'd collected. But as Jessica flipped through the pages, her heart sank. "Michael," she whispered, "listen to this. Madison told everyone not to sit with me at lunch again. She said nobody wants to hear about my stupid rocks. Jason pretended to fall asleep when I was explaining the difference between igneous and metamorphic formations. Mom says I need to try harder to fit in, but I don't know how to be someone else." Michael's face darkened. "There's more, isn't there, about the bullying?" Jessica nodded silently, flipping to another page. Before she could read it, a ranger approached with Emily's cell phone, retrieved from the side pocket of her backpack. "The battery's still good," he said, handing it to Jessica. "Maybe there's something there that could help." Jessica unlocked the phone using Emily's birthday. The wallpaper, a photo of a brilliant geode cut in half, gave way to a screen of app icons. Jessica opened the messaging app first. What she found made her stomach clench. A series of messages from unknown numbers filled the screen. "Nobody wants to hear about your stupid rocks. Why don't you just disappear, fossil freak? We're all pretending to be your partners for the field trip, but don't expect us to actually talk to you." Michael read over her shoulder, his face growing increasingly pale. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" he demanded, turning to Jessica. I didn't know," she stammered, though a voice in the back of her mind whispered that perhaps she had chosen not to know. "She mentioned some minor teasing, but this is systematic bullying. And you told her to try harder to fit in." Michael's voice had an edge that cut through Jessica like a knife. "I thought she was just being overly sensitive," Jessica whispered, shame washing over her. "I thought if she just pushed through her social anxiety, She'd make friends eventually. I wanted her to be normal, to have what other kids have. Normal? Michael's voice rose slightly. Our daughter is brilliant, passionate, and has more knowledge about geology than most college students. That is who she normally is, Jessica. That's her authentic self that you've been trying to... What, fix? The harsh truth of his words struck Jessica with physical force. She had been trying to fix Emily, to mold her into a version that would better fit Jessica's vision of what a happy adolescence should look like. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. Ranger Wilson's voice cut through their building argument. He stood at the table, Emily's notebook in hand. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I found something significant in Emily's notes. He laid the notebook open, pointing to a series of diagrams and notations. These descriptions match characteristics of potential cave systems. See these references to stalactite formations and limestone deposits? Your daughter isn't just observing surface geology. She's documenting features that would typically be found underground. Underground? Jessica repeated. You think she went into a cave? It's a possibility we need to consider, Wilson replied, spreading a topographical map across the table. He circled an area not far from where the backpack was found. This region has a complex geological history. There are several documented cave systems in the park, but there are also rumors of unmapped tunnels and caverns. They're not on official park maps because they're either unconfirmed or deemed too dangerous for public access. The ranger in charge of operations approached, his expression grave. I need to be clear about something, he said, addressing both parents. We're entering a critical time window. The first 24 hours are crucial in any missing persons case, especially involving a child in wilderness conditions. We'll continue searching through the night with our night-equipped teams, but with this rain... He left the sentence unfinished, but its implication hung heavy in the air. Jessica felt her chest tighten, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Michael placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, though she could feel the tremor in his fingers. The search resumed at first light, though light was a generous description for the gray, rain-shrouded morning that greeted them. Jessica had refused to leave the visitor center, catching brief moments of restless sleep on a cot provided by the rangers. Michael had done the same, though they had chosen cots at opposite ends of the room, the weight of their earlier argument creating an invisible barrier between them. 4 search teams departed in different directions, equipped with rain gear and determined expressions. Jessica insisted on joining one despite her exhaustion, and this time, no one argued with her. Michael stayed behind to coordinate with park officials and manage communications, his architectural training giving him a valuable perspective on mapping the search area. The rain fell in sheets, turning the forest floor into a treacherous mix of mud and slick vegetation. Jessica trudged behind the rangers, her eyes constantly scanning the undergrowth for any sign of her daughter. The weight of guilt pressed down on her with each step. How had she failed to see what was happening to Emily? How had she missed the signs of her daughter's suffering? The dogs struggled in the wet conditions, their handlers looking increasingly frustrated as the rain washed away scents almost as quickly as they could find them. Hours passed with no new discoveries, the forest seeming to swallow any trace of Emily's passage. By mid-afternoon, Jessica was soaked through despite her rain gear, her legs aching from navigating the difficult terrain. They had circled back to the area where the backpack was found, methodically searching outward in expanding rings. One of the search dogs suddenly perked up, pulling its handler toward a formation of rocks similar to the one where they'd found the backpack. The team converged on the area, hope surging through their exhausted bodies. "Here!" called one of the rangers. "The dogs have something!" Jessica rushed forward, slipping on the wet ground in her haste. The search dog was intensely focused on a narrow gap between 2 massive boulders, partially obscured by ferns and moss. The handler rewarded the animal while another ranger shone his flashlight into the opening. "There are marks here," he said, pointing to subtle scrapes on the rock face, Someone small might have gone through here recently. Ranger Wilson examined the opening carefully, then looked back at his map. "This isn't on any of our charts," he said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "This could be an entrance to one of the unmapped systems I mentioned." He crouched down, shining his own light into the gap. "It's narrow, but navigable, and look." He pointed to what appeared to be fresh scuff marks on the stone. "Someone's been through here, and not long ago." Jessica pushed forward, her heart racing. "Is it Emily? Could she have gone in there?" "It's a strong possibility," Wilson replied, studying the marks more carefully. "These marks are consistent with someone of her size passing through, and they're recent." He stood up, making a quick decision. "She's not lost," he said, studying the entrance with newfound respect in his eyes. "She's exploring, and it looks like she's found something that nobody else has seen before." "She's not lost," Wilson said, studying the entrance with newfound respect in his eyes. "She's exploring, and it looks like she's found something that nobody else has seen before." Jessica felt a conflicting surge of emotions. Pride in her daughter's apparent discovery mingled with terror at the thought of Emily venturing alone into an unmapped cave system. She moved toward the narrow opening, but Ranger Wilson gently blocked her path. "We need proper equipment before anyone enters," he said, already pulling out his radio. "This is a potential cave rescue situation now, which requires specialized personnel and gear." Within 30 minutes, the area around the rock formation transformed into a hub of focused activity. 2 rangers with spelunking experience arrived, carrying heavy backpacks of equipment. The rain continued to fall in steady sheets, turning the forest floor around them into a slick, treacherous mess of mud and dead leaves. "This is highly irregular," said Chief Ranger Anderson, a stern-faced man in his 50s who had arrived with the spelunking team. "Standard protocol is to wait for the cave rescue unit from Eureka. They're at least 3 hours out in this weather." "My daughter has been missing for nearly 24 hours, Jessica interjected, her voice cracking with exhaustion and fear. "She could be injured or trapped down there. We don't have 3 hours to spare." Ranger Wilson nodded in agreement. "Time is critical here. I'm certified in basic cave rescue, and Parker and Chen are experienced spelunkers." He gestured to the 2 rangers unpacking equipment. "We can at least establish if there's evidence of the girl's presence in the immediate entrance area." Anderson's expression remained doubtful. "And if you find such evidence, you're proposing an unauthorized exploration of an unmapped cave system during a storm with a civilian in tow?" He nodded toward Jessica. "I'm going in," Jessica stated, her tone leaving no room for debate. "That's my daughter down there." "Mrs. Thompson has no caving experience," Anderson objected. "The liability alone—" "I understand the risks," Jessica interrupted, "and I'll sign whatever waiver you need. But I'm not staying behind." Wilson stepped closer to the Chief Ranger, lowering his voice. "I know this isn't protocol, Tom, but I also know what it's like to search for a child." Something in his tone made Jessica glance at him sharply. "If it were your kid, would you wait for protocols?" A tense silence followed, broken only by the steady patter of rain on leaves. Finally, Anderson sighed heavily. "You have 2 hours," he conceded. "At the first sign of danger, you turn back immediately. And Mrs. Thompson stays with you at all times, Wilson. She's your responsibility." While the Rangers quickly assembled the necessary equipment, Jessica called Michael to update him. The reception was poor, his voice breaking up over the static. "They found entrance as cave system," she explained, struggling to maintain the connection. "I'm going in with the Rangers." "What? Jess, no. Too dangerous." Michael's fragmented objections crackled through the phone. "I have to, Michael. She's in there, I can feel it." Jessica's certainty had been growing with each passing minute. This wasn't just motherly hope. Something deeper told her Emily had purposefully entered this hidden world beneath the forest. "Wait for me," His voice cut out entirely as the call dropped. Jessica pocketed her phone and turned to find Ranger Wilson holding out a helmet with an attached headlamp. "Basic safety briefing," he said, as he helped her adjust the helmet. "Stay close to me at all times. Touch nothing without asking first. If I say we turn back immediately. No questions asked. Clear?" Jessica nodded, struggling to control her trembling hands as she was fitted with a safety harness and given a small emergency pack containing water, energy bars, and a first aid kit. "The good news," Ranger Chen added as she checked Jessica's equipment, "is that caves maintain a relatively constant temperature, usually around 55 degrees. If Emily is down there, she's at least protected from the elements." Within minutes, the small expedition was ready. Ranger Wilson would lead, followed by Jessica, with Rangers Chen and Parker bringing up the rear. Anderson watched with evident disapproval as Wilson approached the narrow gap between the rocks. 2 hours, he reminded them. "I'm setting up a surface monitoring station. Radio check-ins every 15 minutes. Wilson nodded, then turned to the opening. He played his powerful flashlight over the entrance, illuminating a tight passage that sloped downward at a gentle angle. "I'm going to go through first," he told Jessica. "Once I'm in, I'll call for you to follow. Just take it slow and do exactly as I say." Jessica watched as Wilson maneuvered his body into the narrow opening, moving with surprising grace for a man of his size. After a few moments, his voice echoed back to her. "All clear, Mrs. Thompson. Come on through. It's a tight squeeze for the first few feet, then it opens up." Taking a deep breath, Jessica lowered herself to the ground and began to edge into the gap. The cold, damp stone pressed against her from all sides as she shimmied forward. For a terrifying moment, she felt stuck, the rock seemingly closing in around her. Panic fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. "Steady," came Wilson's calm voice from ahead. "You're doing fine. Just a bit further." Jessica forced herself to breathe evenly, focusing on the circle of light from Wilson's headlamp that beckoned from just a few feet away. With a final push, she emerged into a slightly larger space where she could at least kneel comfortably. "Good job," Wilson said, helping her to a more stable position. "The passage widens after this section. We can stand up in about 10 more feet." Rangers Chen and Parker followed with practiced efficiency, bringing with them additional equipment and emergency supplies. Once they had all assembled in the widened passage, Wilson conducted a radio check with the surface team. "Comms are good for now," he confirmed, "but they'll likely degrade as we go deeper." The small team proceeded cautiously down the sloping passage. Jessica's headlamp illuminated walls glistening with moisture, occasional mineral deposits sparkling like embedded jewels. Despite her fear and anxiety, she couldn't help but understand Emily's fascination. There was something otherworldly about this hidden realm. After about 50 yards of careful progress, the passage opened into a small chamber roughly the size of a modest living room. Wilson signaled for everyone to stop and swept his light methodically around the space. "Look there," he said suddenly, directing his beam toward a flat rock near the center of the chamber. Jessica gasped. Placed carefully on the stone surface was a torn page from Emily's geology book. The page featured diagrams of cave formations, with Emily's neat handwriting adding additional notes in the margins. Next to the page was a small arrangement of pebbles, forming an arrow that pointed toward one of 3 passages leading from the chamber. "She left this deliberately," Jessica whispered, moving forward to examine the page. "She's leaving us a trail." "Smart kid," Ranger Parker commented, crouching to examine the careful placement of the items. "She must have planned this." Wilson carefully photographed the arrangement before picking up the page. "The question is, why? Why would she venture in here alone, and why leave these breadcrumbs?" "Because she wanted to be found eventually," Jessica realized, a new understanding dawning. This isn't a cry for help or a reckless adventure. She's documenting her discovery. She wants it to be recognized. The team followed the direction indicated by Emily's stone arrow, finding themselves in a narrower passage that descended more steeply. The air grew noticeably cooler and damper as they proceeded, the sounds of dripping water echoing around them. About 20 minutes into their exploration, they encountered another marker, another page placed beneath a distinctive stalactite formation that Emily had sketched with remarkable accuracy. "Her attention to detail is impressive," Chen remarked, examining the drawing. "Most adults wouldn't notice these specific features, let alone document them so precisely." Jessica felt a complicated surge of emotion, pride in her daughter's obvious intelligence and methodical mind, mixed with shame at how she had undervalued these qualities, seeing them as obstacles to normal social integration rather than the extraordinary gifts they were. As they ventured deeper, the radio connection with the surface became increasingly sporadic. During one check-in, Wilson had to repeat himself 3 times before Anderson's broken acknowledgement came through. "We're losing contact," Wilson noted grimly. "We should consider turning back soon if we don't find more concrete evidence of her current location." As if in answer to his concern, their lights revealed another chamber ahead, this one featuring a small underground pond of crystal-clear water. On a dry ledge near the water's edge, they found more definitive signs of Emily's presence: a granola bar wrapper, carefully folded, and another page from her book. Jessica picked up the page with trembling hands. Unlike the previous pages that contained geological information, this one held a personal note in Emily's handwriting. "Finally found a place where I can disappear for real." The words sent a chill through Jessica that had nothing to do with the cool cave air. What did Emily mean by disappear? Was this a desperate act from a bullied child, or something else entirely? "Wilson," called Ranger Chen from across the chamber, "you need to see this." The ranger was examining a narrow crack in the far wall, barely wide enough for a slender person to slip through. Next to it, scratched lightly into the softer stone with what must have been a sharp rock, was a small arrow and Emily's initials, E.T. "She went through here," Chen said, shining her light into the gap. "Recently, judging by the freshness of these marks." Wilson approached and examined the opening carefully. "It's tight, but passable. Parker, what's your assessment?" The other ranger studied the formation. "Appears stable enough. No obvious signs of recent collapse or stress fractures, but it's definitely not a route typically used by cavers. Too constrictive for most adults. Perfect for a small, determined 12-year-old, though," Jessica said, moving toward the opening. Wilson placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Wait, let me check it first." He squeezed partway into the crack, shining his light as far as possible into the space beyond. "I can see it opens up into another chamber about 6 feet in. The passage itself seems solid." Jessica felt her chest tightening at the thought of squeezing through the narrow space. The memory of her momentary panic at the cave entrance returned, amplified by the knowledge that they were now deep underground, with increasingly unreliable communication to the surface. Wilson must have noticed her apprehension. "You don't have to do this part," he said quietly. "Parker can stay here with you while Chen and I check what's beyond." "No," Jessica said firmly, though her voice shook slightly. "I'm coming. Emily went this way, so will I." As she prepared to follow Wilson through the narrow passage, a faint rumbling sound echoed through the cave. Everyone froze, exchanging concerned glances. "What was that?" Jessica whispered. "Could be thunder from the storm above," Parker suggested, but his expression was uneasy. "Sound travels strangely in cave systems." The radio crackled suddenly to life, Anderson's voice barely audible through the static. "Wilson, immediate evacuation. Severe weather. Flash flood potential. Respond." Before Wilson could answer, a louder rumble reverberated through the chamber, and a small shower of dirt and pebbles rained down from a crack in the ceiling. "That's not thunder," Chen said grimly. "That's movement in the cave structure. We need to—" Her words were cut off by a sudden violent tremor that shook the entire chamber. Jessica lost her footing and fell to her knees as more debris showered down around them. One of the rangers shouted something inaudible over the rumbling, and Jessica felt strong hands pulling her toward the narrow crack in the wall. "Through here," Wilson yelled. "It might be safer than the main passage if there's a collapse." The tremors intensified as Wilson helped push Jessica into the narrow opening. As she squeezed through, another violent shake sent a shower of rocks crashing down behind them, partially blocking the way they had. "Come." "Chen. Parker," Wilson called out, but there was no response from the other side of the now obstructed passage. When the rumbling finally subsided, Jessica and Wilson found themselves alone in a new chamber, separated from the rest of their team by a barrier of fallen rock, with their only way forward, leading deeper into the unknown depths of the cave system. The shower of rocks settled, leaving a thick cloud of dust hanging in the air between Jessica and Ranger Wilson. She coughed violently, the sound echoing in the new chamber where they found themselves trapped. Her headlamp cut through the swirling particles, revealing Wilson checking the wall of fallen debris that now separated them from Rangers Chen and Parker. "Chen! Parker, can you hear me?" Wilson called again, pressing his ear against a small gap in the rock fall. After a moment of tense silence, a muffled response came through. "We're okay." Chen's voice was faint but clear enough. "No injuries. What about you two?" "We're fine," Wilson replied, relief evident in his voice. "But there's no way through this collapse. How stable is it on your side?" Another pause followed before Parker's voice filtered through. "Looks relatively stable, but I wouldn't risk trying to clear it. The whole structure could come down." Wilson nodded grimly, though they couldn't see him. "Agreed. You two head back to the surface. Report our situation and our position based on the mapping we've done so far." "What about you and Mrs. Thompson?" Chen asked. "We'll continue forward cautiously. Based on the girl's trail, there might be another way out. Emily got in somehow, and she's been moving purposefully. 2 hours max, then we'll reassess." Jessica stepped closer to the rock wall. "Tell Michael," she began, then faltered, unsure what message to send to her husband. "Tell him we're close to finding her." With a final exchange of safety information and a promise to attempt radio contact at regular intervals, they parted ways, Chen and Parker heading back toward the entrance, while Jessica and Wilson faced the unknown depths ahead. Wilson turned to Jessica, his headlamp illuminating her dust-covered face. "Are you all right? Truly?" She nodded, though her racing heart and trembling hands suggested otherwise. "I have to be. Emily needs me." "Let's assess what we have," Wilson said practically, shrugging off his backpack. 2 flashlights besides our headlamps, water for about 12 hours, energy bars, first aid kit, basic climbing equipment, and emergency blankets. Jessica inventoried her smaller pack, adding, "I have water, some protein bars, and a basic first aid kit too." Wilson studied the chamber they occupied, his experienced eyes taking in details Jessica would have missed. This space shows signs of regular water flow during rainy seasons, but it's dry now. That's good news. Means we're not in immediate danger of flooding from the storm above. "What caused that tremor then?" Jessica asked, glancing nervously at the ceiling. "Hard to say. Could be natural settling, could be related to the heavy rainfall saturating the ground above. Either way, we need to move carefully." He pointed to a passage leading away from the collapsed section. "That seems to be our only option forward." As they prepared to continue, Jessica noticed something gleaming in the beam of her headlamp. "Look," she said, approaching a flat rock shelf on the far side of the chamber. "Another marker from Emily." A small arrangement of colorful pebbles formed an unmistakable arrow pointing toward the passage. Next to it lay another torn page from Emily's geology book. this one featuring detailed information about crystal formations. Emily had circled a paragraph about bioluminescent cave features and added her own annotation. Possible sighting in lower chamber. Need better light to confirm. She's not just wandering, Wilson observed. She's conducting a systematic exploration, following specific geological sea features. That's Emily, Jessica said, feeling a complicated mixture of pride and worry. Once she gets interested in something, she becomes completely focused. They followed the passage indicated by Emily's marker, descending deeper into the cave system. The path narrowed in places, requiring them to turn sideways and squeeze through, then opened into slightly larger tunnels. The constant dripping of water created an eerie percussion that echoed around them. After 20 minutes of careful progress, they emerged into a larger chamber with a ceiling high enough to stand comfortably. Wilson's powerful flashlight revealed something unexpected, a small area that clearly served as a temporary camp. Emily's secondary backpack, a smaller one Jessica recognized from home, rested against a rock. Nearby, a careful arrangement of granola bar wrappers had been stacked in a neat pile, and a broken flashlight lay disassembled, apparently in an attempt to repair it. She was here, Jessica whispered, rushing forward to examine the backpack. Recently. Inside the bag, she found Emily's favorite sweater, carefully folded, a small notebook filled with detailed observations and sketches, and a collection of interesting rock specimens, each wrapped in tissue paper and labeled with scientific precision. Wilson examined one of the samples with obvious admiration. Your daughter has an impressive eye for significant specimens. This appears to be a rare form of calcite crystal, fairly unusual in this region. Jessica opened the notebook with trembling hands, flipping through pages of meticulously documented observations, geological sketches, and coordinates. One entry caught her eye. Day 2. I've discovered what might be a previously undocumented variety of crystalline formation in the lower gallery. The structure suggests a unique mineral composition. Need better lighting for proper documentation, but this could be significant enough for publication if verified. Maybe then they'll notice me for the right reasons. She's been here for 2 days? Jessica gasped, looking up at Wilson. She planned this all along. This wasn't an impulsive decision to wander off. She's been preparing for this expedition. Wilson pointed to a small first aid kit, opened on a flat rock, with a used bandage discarded nearby. She treated some kind of injury, based on the small amount of blood, probably minor but still concerning. Jessica continued reading entries from the notebook, each revealing more about Emily's methodical approach and, more painfully, her motivations. The isolation is actually peaceful. No one laughing at my rock obsession down here. The cave listens without judging. I want to make a real discovery, something important, something that makes them see me. Tears welled in Jessica's eyes as the full weight of her daughter's pain and determination hit her. Emily hadn't run away from something. She'd run toward purpose, toward validation, toward being recognized for her passion rather than ostracized for it. At the back of the notebook, Jessica found a folded photograph, the same family portrait they kept on the mantel at home, taken 3 years ago when Emily had won her first science fair. All 3 of them were smiling, Emily beaming with pride between her parents, her geology project prominently displayed. When had that pride in her daughter's unique interests been replaced by Jessica's misguided push for normal social integration? She still wants to be found, Wilson said gently, pointing to another arrangement of stones nearby, another directional marker. She's leaving these trails deliberately. She wants her discovery documented properly. As Jessica carefully replaced the notebook in Emily's backpack, Wilson's radio crackled unexpectedly to life. Through heavy static, they could make out fragments of Michael's voice. Made it back, telling me. Emily's journal, planned exploration weeks. Wilson adjusted the frequency, trying to improve the Reception. We're reading you partially, surface team. Repeat message. Michael's voice came through slightly clearer. Chen and Parker made it back. Emily's room. Journals show she planned this for weeks. Multiple visits to Park. Supply caches. Jessica and Wilson exchanged stunned looks. She made preparatory trips, Wilson said, probably with school or family visits to the park, staged supplies for a longer expedition. I had no idea, Jessica whispered. All those times she wanted to go hiking with Michael on weekends. I thought she was just bonding with her father. The radio crackled again. Anderson says, dangerous, teams preparing, potential flash flooding, cave passages, get out. The transmission devolved into unintelligible static before cutting out completely. Wilson tried several channels but received nothing but electronic noise. We're too deep for reliable communication now, he said, pocketing the radio. But the message is clear. The situation above ground is deteriorating, and they're concerned about flooding in the cave system. We can't leave without Emily, Jessica insisted, gripping the strap of her daughter's backpack. Agreed, Wilson nodded. But we need to move with greater urgency. Based on her notes and markers, I believe she's heading toward a formation she identified in her sketches. I recognize the characteristics. It should be deeper in the system, but potentially only a few hundred meters from here. As they gathered their equipment to continue, a faint but clear disagreement arose between Wilson and the senior ranger over the radio. The chief ranger wants us to turn back, Wilson explained after a particularly static-filled exchange. Standard protocol in deteriorating conditions. But Emily, Jessica began. We're continuing, Wilson stated firmly, surprising Jessica with his defiance of orders. I've spent 20 years in these forests. I know when to follow protocol and when to follow my gut. Right now, my gut says your daughter is close and we still have time. They left the small camp, following Emily's latest directional marker, down a sloping passage that grew increasingly damp. The sound of running water became more pronounced, suggesting they were approaching an underground stream or pool. Wilson, Jessica said hesitantly as they navigated a particularly narrow section. Back at the visitor center, you said something about understanding what it's like to search for a child. What did you mean by that? The ranger was silent for several long moments, his face hidden as he led the way through the passage. Finally he spoke, his voice unusually soft. My daughter, Sarah. She was 16. I lost her 3 years ago. His words emerged carefully measured, as if each one carried great weight. Not in the forest. To suicide. Years of depression and anxiety that I never fully understood until it was too late. I'm so sorry, Jessica whispered, the unexpected revelation hitting her hard. Every day I think about the signs I missed, Wilson continued, his focus still on the path ahead. The notebooks filled with pain that I never read, the silent cries for help I was too busy to hear. I was so focused on making her better that I never truly saw who she already was. His words struck Jessica with devastating clarity, mirroring her own failures with Emily with such precision that she had to stop walking for a moment, steadying herself against the damp cave wall. That's why you're breaking protocol for us, she realized aloud. You see yourself in me and Emily and Sarah. Wilson finally turned to face her, his headlamp illuminating a face lined with both strength and sorrow. I see a chance to help someone else's child before it's too late. A chance I never got with my own. Before Jessica could respond, a faint sound reached them from further along the passage. Not the ambient dripping or their own echoing footsteps, but something different. Something human. Did you hear that? She whispered, her heart suddenly racing. Wilson nodded, motioning for silence as they listened intently. After a moment, they heard it again. A slight scraping sound, like stone against stone, followed by the brief flicker of light from around a bend in the passage. Emily? Jessica called out, her voice breaking with hope and fear. "Emily, is that you?" Jessica's voice echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the damp walls and fading into the darkness. For a moment there was only silence, the dripping of water, and their own anxious breathing. Then, the small red dots of blood glistening on the cave floor caught her eye, illuminated by the beam of her headlamp. "Blood," she whispered, kneeling down to examine the small drops. "It's fresh." Wilson crouched beside her, studying the crimson specks with the careful assessment of someone who had tracked countless lost hikers. "Not much of it," he noted, his voice low and steady. "Probably a minor injury, a scrape or small cut." Jessica's hand trembled as she pointed to where the droplets continued, forming a sporadic trail that led toward a narrow tunnel branching off from the main chamber. She went this way. With renewed urgency, they followed the blood trail, their headlamps creating dancing shadows on the walls as they moved deeper into the cave system. The tunnel gradually widened, opening into a cathedral-like chamber with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above their light's reach. "Look at this," Wilson said, his voice tinged with awe as he directed his beam across the space. What Jessica saw took her breath away. At the center of the chamber lay what could only be described as a makeshift laboratory. A flat stone platform served as a workspace where dozens of rock and crystal specimens were meticulously arranged in neat rows, each with small handwritten labels attached. Several of Emily's field guides were open to specific pages, weighted down with small stones to prevent them from closing. "This is incredible," Wilson murmured, approaching the collection. "Your daughter has categorized these perfectly. This is graduate-level work." Jessica moved closer, her chest tight with a confusing mixture of pride and guilt. Each specimen had been carefully cleaned, labeled with scientific nomenclature, and arranged in what appeared to be a taxonomic system that even she, with her limited geological knowledge, could recognize as remarkably sophisticated. "She's been collecting these systematically," Wilson observed, examining one particularly striking purple crystal. "These aren't random samples. She's documenting a specific mineral progression through the cave system." Jessica picked up one of the labels written in Emily's precise handwriting. "Possible new variant of fluorite with unusual phosphorescence properties requires spectroscopic analysis for confirmation." Among the arranged stones, Jessica noticed a small first aid kit, its lid open. Inside, several adhesive bandages were missing, and a used, blood-stained piece of gauze lay discarded beside it. She picked it up with trembling fingers. "She hurt herself," Jessica whispered, but had the presence of mind to clean and bandage the wound. Wilson nodded. "That's actually reassuring. She's thinking clearly, taking care of herself. This isn't someone in a panic. This is methodical exploration." As they continued examining the impromptu research station, Jessica discovered a small notebook half hidden beneath a field guide. Opening it revealed pages of Emily's journal entries, interspersed with detailed scientific observations. Day 2. The deeper passages reveal increasingly rare crystalline formations. I've documented 17 distinct varieties not listed in standard field guides for this region. I wonder if anyone will care about my discovery. Maybe if I find something important enough, they'll stop ignoring me. Jessica's eyes filled with tears as she read further. "When I talk about geological formations at school, everyone zones out or laughs. Mom keeps telling me to talk about normal things, but these are normal to me. Why can't they see how amazing these structures are? They took millions of years to form, each one unique, each one telling a story about our planet. And all anyone cares about is who's dating who and what's trending on TikTok." The pain in her daughter's words struck Jessica like a physical blow. All this time, she had been trying to change Emily, to make her fit into some arbitrary definition of normal rather than celebrating the extraordinary mind and passion she possessed. Wilson was examining a detailed map Emily had created of the cave system. "This is remarkable," he said, tracing the carefully drawn passages with his finger. "She's mapped sections that aren't on any official park documents. Your daughter might have discovered an entirely new branch of the Redwood Cave network." She's been planning this for months, Jessica realized, flipping through more journal entries. "Listen to this. Dad never questions why I want to come hiking in the same section of the park. He just enjoys the time together. Little does he know I've been caching supplies on each visit, preparing for my expedition." Wilson checked his watch, concern crossing his features. "We should keep moving. Based on the blood drops and these fresh markings, she can't be too far ahead." As they prepared to continue, a sudden crackle from Wilson's radio made them both jump. The ranger's chief voice came through, broken and staticky, but with undeniable urgency. "Wilson, immediate evacuation, storm intensifying, flash flood warnings." Wilson pressed the transmit button. "Copy that. We've found evidence the girl is close. Requesting additional time to—" "Negative." The chief's voice cut through sharply. "Water levels rising and entrance passages compromised. Must evacuate now." Jessica grabbed Wilson's arm. "We can't leave. We're close to finding her." "I know it." The ranger hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the search. After a moment, he responded into the radio. "Understood. We'll begin extraction procedures." He clicked off the radio and turned to Jessica. "We have a little more time. I know these systems. The flooding won't reach these deeper sections immediately." "Thank you," Jessica whispered, gratitude washing through her. They continued following the blood trail, which led them toward another passage. As they approached, Jessica noticed something that made her heart leap, a pink hair tie she recognized as Emily's, deliberately placed at the entrance to the tunnel. The passage narrowed considerably as they progressed, requiring them to crouch and occasionally crawl. Jessica fought against a rising sense of claustrophobia, focusing instead on finding her daughter. The physical discomfort seemed trivial compared to what Emily must be experiencing, alone, possibly injured, in this alien underground world. After what felt like an eternity of uncomfortable progress, they emerged into another chamber, smaller than the previous one, but with a unique feature. A wall covered in glistening white crystal formations that sparkled magnificently in their headlamps. "Aragonite," Wilson identified in a hushed voice. "Extremely delicate formations. Very rare to find them so perfectly preserved." At the base of the crystal wall, they found more evidence of Emily's presence. Another small collection of specimens, even more carefully arranged than the previous ones. Among them lay a folded piece of paper. Jessica opened it to find a family photograph. The three of them at Emily's science fair 2 years ago, all smiling. The sight of their happier past made Jessica's throat tighten with emotion. "She carried this with her," Jessica said, tracing her finger over Emily's smiling face in the photo. "Despite everything, she wants connection," Wilson observed quietly. "That's important to remember." As they examined the new collection, the radio crackled again, but this time it was Michael's voice that broke through. "Jessica, are you there? The rangers say you need to come out now. It's getting dangerous." Wilson handed her the radio. "Keep it brief. Signal's weak." "Michael, we're okay," Jessica responded. "We've found Emily's trail. She's been conducting a geological survey. She planned this, Michael. This wasn't an accident." "I know." Michael's voice came back, clearer for a moment. "I went through her room with the park staff. She has maps, supply lists, research papers on the cave systems. She's been planning this for weeks. But Jessica, the storm is getting worse. The entrance you used is starting to flood, they're saying." The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving an ominous static in its wake. Wilson tried several channels but received nothing but electronic noise. "We're losing contact completely," he said grimly. "Not good." A sudden noise from deeper in the cave system caught their attention. A distinct sound of stone against stone, followed by what sounded like a muffled exclamation. "That's her," Jessica whispered, already moving toward the sound. They followed a short passage that opened into yet another chamber. This one featured a small underground stream cutting across the floor, the water clear and fresh. On the far side, they discovered more evidence of Emily's methodical exploration. Her careful stone markers pointing the way forward, and another page from her journal, weighed down by a particularly beautiful geode split to reveal purple crystals inside. Jessica picked up the page, reading aloud. "I want to do something important, something that makes them notice me. Maybe then they'll stop ignoring me." The words landed like physical blows. All this time, Emily hadn't been acting out or running away. She had been desperately trying to be seen for who she truly was, to have her passion recognized rather than dismissed. "She's brilliant," Wilson said, examining the notes Emily had made about water flow patterns in the cave. "These observations would be valuable to our geological survey team." The ranger's radio suddenly emitted a burst of static, followed by the chief ranger's voice, now clearly agitated. "Wilson, respond immediately. Emergency evacuation ordered. Cave entrance flooding rapidly." Before Wilson could respond, they heard a distinct clattering sound from a narrow passage ahead, followed by a beam of light briefly illuminating the walls before disappearing again. Jessica started toward the passage, but Wilson caught her arm, pointing to the stream cutting across the chamber floor. "Look," he said urgently. "The water level is rising. That wasn't happening 5 minutes ago." They watched in growing alarm as the small stream visibly widened, the water moving faster and beginning to spill over its natural channel. "The storm above is feeding into the system," Wilson explained, his expression grave. "If the main entrance is flooding, water will be seeking new pathways through the cave. We need to find Emily and get to higher ground immediately." As they debated which passage to take, the sound of falling rocks echoed from deeper in the cave, followed by what seemed unmistakably like a child's startled cry. While the discussion about continuing or returning intensified, a tremor suddenly shook the cave, making small rocks fall from the ceiling, a silent warning that time and the stability of the cave were against them. Small rocks continued to fall from the ceiling as the tremor shook the cave. Jessica instinctively raised her arms to protect her head, while Wilson crouched low, his experienced eyes scanning the chamber for signs of structural compromise. "That wasn't just settling," Wilson said, his voice tight with concern. "The storm must be affecting the entire system." He brushed dust from his shoulder and straightened. "We need to move quickly, but carefully." Jessica stared down the passage where Emily's cry had come from, moments before. "Did you hear her? That was Emily, I'm sure of it." Wilson nodded grimly. "I heard it too." He checked his watch and glanced at the rising water level in the small stream. The clear trickle had transformed into a murky flow that had already doubled in width since they'd entered the chamber. "We don't have much time. The chief ranger wouldn't have ordered evacuation unless the situation above ground is deteriorating rapidly." "Then let's go," Jessica urged, already moving toward the passage. "Every minute counts." As they approached the narrow tunnel entrance, the radio crackled back to life. The transmission was heavily fragmented, but Chief Anderson's authoritative voice broke through the static. "Wilson, immediate extraction, collapse risk, at least 3 sections, already flooded." The ranger pressed the transmit button, his expression conflicted. "Chief, we've confirmed audio contact with the subject. Proceeding to likely location. Request additional time." The response was immediate and unequivocal. "Negative. That's direct order. Extraction team. Your position." Jessica grabbed Wilson's arm. "Please," she pleaded. "We're so close." After a moment of tense deliberation, Wilson made his decision. "We continue, but only for 30 more minutes. After that, we have no choice but to head back. with or without Emily. They entered the narrowing passage, moving as quickly as safety allowed. The walls here were slick with moisture, suggesting water had flowed through recently. Their headlamps cast jumping shadows as they navigated a series of twists and tight squeezes. The passage eventually opened into a breathtaking chamber dominated by towering stalagmites that resembled a petrified forest. Unlike the previous areas, this space showed signs of recent disturbance: scuff marks on the dusty floor, small piles of rock samples, and most tellingly, the distinct impression of small footprints leading toward an elevated platform of flat rock. "Emily!" Jessica called, her voice echoing dramatically through the vast space. "Emily, it's Mom. We're here to help you." The only response was the persistent dripping of water and the faint rumble of distant cave movement. Wilson swept his powerful flashlight across the chamber, the beam eventually settling on something that made Jessica's heart leap: a small light flickering from behind a formation on the far side of the room. "There!" she exclaimed, already moving forward. They hurried across the chamber, careful not to disturb the delicate formations. As they approached the source of light, they discovered another of Emily's carefully constructed research stations. A small LED lantern illuminated an array of precisely arranged crystal samples, each labeled and categorized. Beside the display lay Emily's notebook, open to a fresh page with detailed sketches of the chamber's formations. Jessica picked up the notebook with trembling hands, reading the most recent entry. "The acoustics in the cathedral chamber are extraordinary. Perfect resonance. Sound travels here unlike anywhere else in the system. The mineral composition may contribute to this property. Need to document fully before proceeding to the Crystal Gallery." "She's documenting everything like a professional geologist," Wilson observed, genuine admiration in his voice. "These observations are remarkably precise." Jessica flipped through more pages, each revealing Emily's methodical approach and scientific rigor, but interspersed with the technical notes were heartbreaking personal reflections. "When I make my discovery public, maybe the kids at school will finally see I'm not just a weird rock girl. Maybe Mom will understand why this matters so much to me. Dad already gets it, I think, but he's too protective. I need to prove I can do something important on my own." A fresh wave of guilt washed over Jessica. All those times she'd half listened to Emily's excited explanations about geological formations, all those subtle pushes toward normal social activities. She had been systematically devaluing the very thing that made her daughter special. The ominous rumble of shifting rock pulled Jessica from her thoughts. Wilson was already moving, his expression urgent. "We need to keep moving. Which way to this Crystal Gallery?" she mentioned. Jessica scanned the chamber, spotting another of Emily's signature markers. A small arrow formed from colorful stones pointing toward a passage on the far side of the room. "There," she said, gathering Emily's notebook to take with them. As they crossed the chamber, the radio burst into static again. This time, Michael's voice broke through, panic evident even through the electronic distortion. "Jessica, the Rangers, flooding getting worse. Sending rescue team, your location. Emily's journal at home says, dangerous section ahead." Wilson pressed the transmit button. "Michael, we're close to finding her." "What dangerous section? What did the journal say?" Only fragments of Michael's response came through. "Unstable. Her notes. Potential collapse. Be careful." The transmission died completely, leaving them with this new, unsettling warning. Wilson checked the radio's battery and adjusted the frequency, but the device remained stubbornly silent. "We've lost contact completely," he said grimly. "The rock density must be too great at this depth." They continued toward the passage Emily had marked, moving with increased caution. The tunnel beyond was narrower than previous ones, requiring them to proceed single file. Jessica followed close behind Wilson, fighting against the sense of enclosed space that threatened to trigger her claustrophobia. "The air is changing," Wilson noted after several minutes of careful progress. More humid. We might be approaching an underground water source. The passage eventually widened, allowing them to walk side by side again. They emerged onto a ledge overlooking a small, underground lake with water so clear it was nearly invisible, except for the ripples on its surface. The far side of the cavern was adorned with spectacular crystal formations that caught their headlamps and fractured the light into thousands of rainbow reflections. "The Crystal Gallery," Jessica breathed, understanding immediately why Emily had been drawn to this place. Wilson scanned the chamber methodically. "There are multiple exits from this room," he said, pointing to 3 different passages leading away from the lake. "Which one would she have taken?" Before Jessica could respond, a distant rumble shook the cave, stronger than the previous tremors. Small stones and dust showered down from the ceiling, disturbing the pristine surface of the underground lake. "That's not good," Wilson muttered, stepping back from the edge. "These tremors are getting more frequent and more intense." A sudden commotion of falling rocks from one of the passages caught their attention, followed by the unmistakable beam of a flashlight dancing across the walls. "Emily!" Jessica called out, her voice carrying across the water. The light froze, then swung in their direction. For a heart-stopping moment, Jessica thought they had finally found her daughter. Then a male voice responded, "Jessica? Wilson?" Michael emerged from the passage, his clothing muddy and torn, followed by one of the rangers Jessica had met earlier at the visitor center. Michael's face was a mask of determination and fear, his normally meticulous appearance completely abandoned in his desperate search. "Michael!" Jessica gasped. "What are you doing down here? How did you—" "I couldn't wait up there," he interrupted, crossing quickly to embrace her. "Not while both of you were in danger. We found another entrance, an old mining tunnel that connects to the cave system." The ranger with Michael stepped forward, his expression clearly disapproving. "Mr. Thompson insisted on joining the rescue effort, against all protocols and my explicit instructions." Wilson's face tightened. "You should have stayed at the command center, Michael. This environment is extremely dangerous for inexperienced—" "She's my daughter, too," Michael cut in, his voice rising. "I'm not going to stand around waiting for updates while my family is trapped underground." His outburst dislodged several small rocks from a nearby formation, sending them clattering to the ground. The sound echoed ominously through the chamber. "Keep your voice down," Wilson warned sharply. "Sound vibrations can trigger—" As if responding to his warning, a larger tremor suddenly shook the cavern. A significant crack appeared in the ceiling above them, sending a shower of rocks cascading down near the edge of the underground lake. "Everyone back!" Wilson shouted, pulling Jessica away from the falling debris. The tremor subsided, leaving behind a tense silence broken only by the splash of the last few pebbles hitting the water. "This is why we have protocols," the other ranger said pointedly to Michael. "Your presence has introduced another risk factor into an already dangerous situation." Michael's face flushed with anger. "You think I'm just going to abandon my family? When Jessica told me she was coming down here, I should have insisted on coming with her from the start." "And what good would that have done?" Jessica countered, her own frustration boiling over. "Emily is down here because we failed to see who she really is, because we've been so busy trying to make her into someone else that we missed what was happening right in front of us." "Don't put this all on me," Michael retorted. "I wasn't the one pushing her to be normal when she was clearly exceptional in her own way." "Enough," Wilson interjected forcefully. "This isn't helping anyone, least of all Emily." As the arguing continued, Jessica noticed something the others had missed: fresh footprints in the fine dust near one of the passage entrances, and alongside them, small drops of blood leading into the darkness. Without a word, she slipped away from the group, determined to follow the trail while the others were distracted by their confrontation. The narrow passage twisted sharply downward, requiring Jessica to brace herself against the walls as she descended. The blood drops were more frequent here, suggesting Emily's injury might be worse than they had initially thought. Driven by mounting concern, Jessica pushed forward, her headlamp illuminating the way as the sounds of the argument faded behind her. The passage opened onto a ledge overlooking a breathtaking chamber filled with glowing blue crystals. In the ethereal light, Jessica could make out a small figure hunched over a notebook on the far side of the room. Her heart leaped in recognition. Emily, absorbed in her work, apparently unaware of the danger surrounding her or the search party that had spent nearly 2 days looking for her. Tears of relief filled Jessica's eyes as she called out, "Emily!" Just as her daughter turned toward the sound, a violent tremor shook the cave. Jessica lost her footing on the crumbling ledge, and with a terrified cry, she felt the rock give way beneath her feet. Jessica's scream echoed through the chamber as the ledge crumbled beneath her feet. Time seemed to slow as she plummeted, her body twisting instinctively. Her shoulder slammed into an outcropping of rock, sending shards of pain shooting down her arm before she tumbled the remaining few feet to the chamber floor. The impact drove the air from her lungs, leaving her gasping in the swirling dust. "Mom!" Emily's voice cut through the ringing in Jessica's ears. Small footsteps rushed toward her across the stone floor. Jessica pushed herself to a sitting position, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. Through the settling dust, she saw her daughter's face, illuminated by the ethereal blue glow of the surrounding crystals. Emily's eyes were wide with shock, a small cut visible on her forehead, neatly covered with a butterfly bandage. "Emily," Jessica whispered, reaching out with her uninjured arm. "You're okay." Emily stood a few feet away, clutching her notebook to her chest, not rushing into her mother's embrace as Jessica had imagined countless times during their search. Instead, she looked almost wary, as if unsure how to react to her mother's sudden appearance in this secret world she'd claimed for herself. "What are you doing here?" Emily asked, her voice a mixture of surprise and something that sounded uncomfortably like disappointment. Before Jessica could respond, Wilson's voice called down from above. "Jessica, are you hurt?" His headlamp beam cut through the dust, illuminating the scene. "I'm okay," Jessica called back, though her throbbing shoulder suggested otherwise. "I found Emily." In the commotion that followed, Michael and the other ranger carefully made their way down to the chamber floor, using a more stable route around the collapsed ledge. The reunion that Jessica had imagined, tearful hugs, profound relief, instead unfolded with a strange tension. Emily backed away as her father approached, looking more cornered than relieved. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her eyes darting between her parents and the rangers. "Any of you. It's not safe if you don't know the paths." "Not safe?" Michael's voice rose with a combination of relief and anger. "Emily, we've been searching for you for nearly 2 days. The entire Park Service has been looking for you." Emily's expression shifted to one of genuine surprise. 2 days? But I left markers. I thought you'd understand I was conducting research." Jessica took a moment to assess their situation while Michael worked through his conflicting emotions. They were now in a roughly circular chamber with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness. The walls were studded with the bioluminescent crystals that bathed everything in a soft blue glow. Several passages led from the main chamber, and the distinct sound of running water echoed from one of them. Wilson was checking his radio without success. "No signal down here at all," he reported. "We're completely cut off from the surface team." Jessica turned her attention back to Emily, who was organizing her materials with a calmness that seemed surreal, given the circumstances. "Emily, honey, why did you come down here alone? Why didn't you tell anyone what you were planning?" Emily looked up from her notebook with an expression that struck Jessica as heartbreakingly adult. Would anyone have cared or understood? The simple questions landed like physical blows. Jessica remembered all the times she'd nodded absently while Emily explained her latest geological discovery. All the times she'd redirected conversations about rock formations to more normal topics. "I might have," came Wilson's voice, surprisingly gentle. He approached Emily with professional interest rather than the patronizing concern the girl was clearly expecting. "These formations you've documented, they're remarkable. Some may be previously unclassified." Emily's face lit up with such sudden joy that Jessica felt a stab of jealousy and shame. This stranger had validated her daughter's passion in seconds, while Jessica had spent years subtly undermining it. "I've been mapping the entire system," Emily explained eagerly, opening her notebook to show Wilson detailed sketches. "There are at least 3 chambers that don't appear on any of the published surveys of the Redwood Cave networks. And these bioluminescent crystals, I've never seen anything like them documented for this region." While Emily and Wilson discussed the geological significance of her findings, Jessica took stock of their situation. Her fall had complicated matters significantly. The pain in her shoulder had settled into a persistent throb that suggested it might be seriously injured. The original passage they'd used to enter the chamber was now partially collapsed. And somewhere above them, a dangerous storm was causing the cave system to slowly flood. "Emily," Jessica interrupted, hating to break the first moment of genuine enthusiasm she'd seen from her daughter in months. "We need to talk about getting out of here. The storm above has gotten worse. Some of the upper passages are already flooding." Emily's expression fell, but she nodded with unexpected maturity. "I know. I've been tracking the water levels. That's why I moved down to this chamber. It's on a higher elevation than the connecting passages. Water flows downward through that tunnel." She pointed to one of the passages. "But it won't reach this high. We're safe here." The other ranger, whom Michael had identified as Ranger Brooks, looked skeptical. "How can you be sure? These systems can be unpredictable during flash flooding events." "Because I've studied the hydrological patterns," Emily replied with such confidence that even Brooks looked taken aback. "I've been placing markers at various points to track water movement through the cave system. This chamber remains dry even during significant precipitation events." Jessica couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at her daughter's comprehension of such complex systems, even as she worried about their immediate safety. "That may be," Wilson acknowledged, "but we still need to find a way back to the surface. The passage we came through is unstable, and based on what you're saying, the lower roots might be flooding." Emily hesitated, then admitted, "I know another way out. I've been exploring the system for weeks, not just today." "Weeks?" Michael's voice rose again. "What are you talking about?" Emily explained how she had discovered the cave entrance months ago during a school field trip and had been secretly returning during weekend hikes with her father, gradually exploring deeper and caching supplies for a more extensive expedition. Each time she would venture a little further, mapping as she went, preparing for the moment when she could make a significant discovery. "I knew if I told anyone, they'd either stop me or take over," she explained. "I needed to do this myself, to prove I could." Jessica felt the weight of her daughter's words. How desperate for validation must Emily have been to plan such an elaborate expedition? How invisible must she have felt in her day-to-day life to risk so much for the chance to be seen? A distant rumble interrupted their conversation, followed by the unmistakable sound of rushing water growing louder. "That doesn't sound good," Brooks said, moving toward the passage Emily had identified as the water route. "The rain must be getting worse," Wilson concluded. "We need to move to higher ground immediately." Emily gathered her research materials with practiced efficiency, carefully securing specimens and notes in her backpack. "We need to take the northeast passage," she said, pointing to an opening barely visible behind a large formation. "It leads upward to a chamber that connects with a surface fissure. That's how I've been entering and exiting." As they prepared to move, Jessica attempted to stand but gasped as pain shot through her injured shoulder and down her side. Michael was immediately beside her, his anger temporarily set aside. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly. "I can walk," Jessica assured him, though her pallor suggested the pain was significant. "We need to focus on getting out." The sound of rushing water grew louder, and Emily looked alarmed for the first time since they'd found her. "It's coming faster than it should be," she said, her scientific certainty wavering. Something must have changed in the upper system. With Michael supporting Jessica, they hurried toward the passage Emily had indicated. The narrow tunnel forced them to proceed single file, with Emily leading the way and Wilson bringing up the rear. The passage sloped upward, which offered some reassurance, but it narrowed as they progressed, requiring them to turn sideways in some sections. Jessica fought against rising claustrophobia, focusing on Emily's small form ahead of her. The pain in her shoulder made each movement a challenge, but she forced herself forward, unwilling to become the weak link in their escape. The passage eventually opened into another chamber, this one smaller and with a visible crack in the ceiling that allowed a thin shaft of natural light to penetrate the darkness, the first hint of the world above they had seen in hours. "That's the fissure," Emily explained, pointing upward. "It's too narrow for adults to pass through, but it means we're close to the surface. The main exit is through that passage." She pointed to an opening on the far side of the chamber. "It leads to a series of stepping stones across an underground stream, then up to a small cave mouth hidden behind a fallen log." As they crossed the chamber, Jessica noticed that Emily moved with complete confidence. Her earlier excitement about her discoveries now channeled into focused determination to lead them to safety. This was a side of her daughter she had never seen before, capable, knowledgeable, and surprisingly composed under pressure. They had almost reached the far passage when a violent tremor shook the chamber, stronger than any of the previous ones. A significant crack appeared in the wall near the exit, and water began to seep through, quickly becoming a steady flow. "The system is becoming unstable," Wilson warned, steadying Jessica as the tremor subsided. "We need to move faster." Emily stared at the flowing water with scientific detachment that barely masked her growing concern. "This shouldn't be happening," she murmured. "The hydrological model I developed doesn't account for water entering from this direction." As they watched, the crack widened abruptly, and the trickle transformed into a powerful surge that quickly began to fill the lower portion of the chamber. "Change of plans," Wilson announced, pulling them back from the rising water. "We need to find another route." Emily's confident expression faltered for the first time. "But this is the only way I know to the surface," she admitted, her voice small and suddenly matching her age. "The other passages either lead deeper into the system or to dead ends." Jessica looked from the rapidly rising water to the small shaft of light penetrating from above, too narrow for any of them to fit through, yet tantalizing in its promise of the world beyond. They were trapped between the rising flood and the unreachable surface, with no clear path forward. While Michael and the Rangers desperately searched for alternatives, Jessica noticed something that the others had missed. Fresh air, moving distinctly through the chamber, causing subtle ripples on the water's surface. She remembered something Emily had mentioned in her notes about air currents in cave systems. "Emily," she said quietly, "you mentioned air currents in your notes somewhere, didn't you?" "Emily," Jessica said quietly, "you mentioned air currents in your notes somewhere, didn't you?" Emily looked at her mother with surprise, clearly startled that Jessica had actually read her notes carefully enough to remember such a detail. "Yes," she nodded slowly, her scientific mind engaging despite their dire situation. "Air currents in cave systems can indicate secondary passages or connections to the surface that aren't immediately visible." Jessica pointed to the subtle ripples on the water's surface. "The air is moving, and not just from the fissure above." Emily's eyes widened with understanding. She quickly moved around the chamber, her hands outstretched, feeling for the movement of air. When she reached a seemingly solid wall near the corner of the chamber, she stopped. "Here," she said with renewed confidence. "There's definitely airflow coming through these rocks." Wilson joined her, examining the wall carefully with his powerful flashlight. "She's right. Look at the formation, pattern. This could be a false wall, just a thin section of limestone deposits." As the water continued to rise, now reaching their ankles, Michael and Ranger Brooks began carefully testing the rock face, looking for any weakness that might indicate a passage beyond. "Here," Michael called suddenly, his fingers finding a narrow gap. "I can feel air coming through strongly." Working together, they determined that what appeared to be a solid wall was actually a thin screen of limestone formations that had built up over time, concealing a passage behind. With careful coordination, they began removing sections of the brittle rock, creating an opening just large enough for a person to squeeze through. "Emily, you go first," Wilson directed, helping the girl toward the newly revealed passage. "Mrs. Thompson next, then Mr. Thompson. Brooks and I will follow." Emily slipped through the opening without hesitation, her small frame easily navigating the tight space. Jessica followed, with more difficulty, wincing as her injured shoulder scraped against the rock. Inside, she found herself in a narrow tunnel that sloped distinctly upward, an encouraging sign. Once everyone had made it through, Wilson shone his light ahead, revealing a passage that twisted upward into darkness. This could lead to the surface, or at least to a higher section of the cave system away from the flooding. They moved forward as quickly as the narrow confines would allow, with Emily once again taking the lead, her confidence restored by this proof of her geological instincts. After several minutes of climbing, Jessica's headlamp began to flicker ominously, the batteries failing after hours of continuous use. "My light's dying," she announced, the fluttering beam creating disorienting shadows on the tunnel walls. Emily stopped and turned back. "Mine's already dead," she admitted. "I've been using the bioluminescence to navigate the areas I know well." As if in response, Jessica's headlamp gave one final burst of light before going dark completely, plunging her into absolute blackness. The sudden darkness was so complete it seemed to have physical weight, pressing against her eyes and skin. Panic clawed at her throat as the walls seemed to close in around her. "Jessica," Michael's voice came from just behind her, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "We're right here. Keep moving forward. Wilson still has his light." But even Wilson's powerful flashlight was beginning to dim, its beam growing yellowish and weak. "Battery conservation mode," he explained grimly. "It'll last longer but won't be as bright." They continued their ascent in the fading light, the darkness growing thicker around them with each passing minute. Jessica focused on the rhythm of her breathing, fighting against the rising tide of claustrophobia. The absolute darkness awakened primal fears she hadn't known existed within her. Suddenly, she felt Emily's small hand take hers. "It's okay, Mom," her daughter said quietly. "Look ahead." Jessica raised her eyes and gasped softly. In the darkness ahead, a faint blue-green glow was becoming visible, not the harsh, artificial light of their headlamps, but a soft, pulsing luminescence that seemed to emanate from the rock itself. As they moved forward, the glow intensified, revealing that they had entered a chamber entirely lined with the same bioluminescent crystals they had seen earlier. The ethereal light bathed everything in a soft aquamarine radiance, revealing a space of breathtaking beauty. Crystalline formations hung from the ceiling and rose from the floor, each one emitting its own gentle light. "It's a fungal bioluminescence," Emily explained, her scientific enthusiasm momentarily overriding their perilous situation. "The crystals themselves aren't glowing. They're colonized by a bioluminescent fungus that feeds on minerals in the rock. I've never seen anything like it documented in North American cave systems." Jessica stared in wonder at the natural light show surrounding them. In the soft glow, she could see her daughter's face clearly for the first time since finding her. the familiar features animated by genuine passion and knowledge. Emily wasn't just surviving in this alien environment, she was thriving in it, understanding it in ways that the adults around her could not. "It's beautiful," Jessica whispered, truly seeing what had captured her daughter's imagination so completely. A flashback engulfed her, Emily at 9 years old, bursting into the kitchen with a book of geological wonders. "Mom, did you know there are caves where the rocks glow in the dark?" she had asked, eyes wide with excitement. Jessica remembered her own distracted response. "That's interesting, honey," as she continued preparing dinner, barely glancing at the pictures Emily was so eager to share. In that moment, standing in the glowing chamber that her daughter had discovered, Jessica understood the depth of her failure to see Emily, truly see her, for who she was. Every dismissive, "That's nice, dear," and every push toward normal social activities had been a rejection of the brilliant, passionate person standing before her. "You found this," Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. "You discovered a completely undocumented bioluminescent system." Emily nodded, pride evident in her posture despite her exhaustion. "I've been mapping the distribution patterns and taking samples for analysis. The fungus appears to be most concentrated in areas with specific mineral compositions. I think it might be an entirely new species." Wilson examined one of the glowing formations with obvious admiration. "This is a significant scientific discovery, Emily. Genuinely groundbreaking work." On the surface, the ongoing storm had intensified to dangerous levels. The small rescue team that had ventured in through the alternative entrance was receiving increasingly urgent communications about deteriorating conditions. "We need to get moving," Brooks reminded them, pulling their attention back to their precarious situation. "This is extraordinary, but we're still a long way from safety." Emily nodded, examining the chamber thoughtfully. "The bioluminescence is strongest in that direction," she said, pointing to a passage on the far side of the chamber. "That's probably where the airflow is strongest too, which could indicate a path to the surface." They followed Emily's lead, moving through the glowing tunnel that sloped increasingly upward. The natural light provided by the bioluminescent formations was sufficient for basic navigation, though they moved more slowly without their powerful headlamps. As they progressed, Jessica found a small notebook that Emily had left at what appeared to be another research station. Flipping through it while they rested briefly, she found detailed documentation of the bioluminescent phenomenon, complete with Emily's preliminary hypotheses about its cause and distribution. "Is this a new type of fungus?" Jessica asked, surprising herself with her genuine interest. Emily looked up, clearly surprised by the question. "I think so. It has characteristics similar to Mycena chlorophyllus, but the habitat is all wrong, and the luminescence patterns are different. I've been calling it Mycena spelunca in my notes. Cave mushroom, basically. Not very creative, but scientifically descriptive." "I think it's perfect," Jessica said sincerely. As they continued upward, the bioluminescence grew increasingly intense, bathing the passage in a surreal blue-green light that transformed the ordinary limestone into something from another world. Jessica could understand now why Emily had been so drawn to this place. It wasn't just the scientific significance, but the otherworldly beauty that spoke to something deep within her daughter's soul. They eventually reached a chamber where the bioluminescence was particularly intense around a small underground lake. The still water reflected the glowing, sealing like a mirror, creating the illusion of infinite space both above and below. Jessica examined the encampment that Emily had clearly established here, finding a lantern that had been broken in what appeared to be a minor rockfall. "This is where you were staying?" she asked. Emily nodded. "It's the most beautiful part of the cave system. The acoustics are amazing too. Listen." She tapped a small stalactite gently, producing a clear, bell-like tone that resonated throughout the chamber. Across the underground lake, a brief, flickering light caught Jessica's attention. Not the steady glow of the bioluminescent fungi, but something artificial and unsteady. "Did you see that?" she asked, pointing toward the far shore. Before anyone could respond, they heard a distinct sound from across the water, stone striking stone, followed by a beam of light that briefly swept across the ceiling before disappearing again. "Emily?" Jessica called, her voice echoing across the chamber. "Is there someone else down here with us?" "Emily?" Jessica called, her voice echoing across the chamber. "Is there someone else down here with us?" The mysterious light vanished immediately, plunging the far side of the underground lake back into bioluminescent twilight. Jessica strained her eyes against the darkness, certain she had seen movement beyond the ghostly blue glow. "No one else should be here," Emily replied, her voice unusually small. "This section isn't on any maps." Wilson raised his nearly depleted flashlight, directing its weakening beam across the water. "Hello?" he called. "This is Park Ranger Wilson. Identify yourself." For several tense seconds, only silence answered them. Then a slender beam of light appeared again, bobbing as its holder moved around the lake's perimeter toward them. Emily suddenly gasped. "It's Emily's light," she whispered, stepping forward. "Mom, that's my backup headlamp. I left it on the other side yesterday when I was collecting samples." As the figure emerged from the shadows, Jessica felt her breath catch. Emily, a second Emily, was approaching them, wearing the same style of hiking clothes as her daughter, carrying a collection bag full of rock samples. For one disorienting moment, Jessica wondered if the cave's strange atmosphere was causing her to hallucinate. The beam of light finally illuminated the newcomer's face, revealing not Emily, but another girl of similar age and build. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes widened with shock at the sight of the search party. "Samantha?" Emily exclaimed, recognition flooding her voice. "What are you doing here?" The girl lowered her headlamp, blinking nervously at the group of adults. I followed you," she admitted. "I've been watching you come here for weeks. I wanted to see what was so interesting that you'd rather be here than—" She trailed off, looking embarrassed. "Then be around other kids," Emily finished for her, understanding immediately. "You followed me today?" Samantha nodded, clutching her collection bag protectively. "I stayed back during the field trip and slipped away when the teachers weren't looking. I've been tracking you through the caves." She held up a small notebook, remarkably similar to Emily's. "I've been taking my own notes." Jessica stared at the newcomer, trying to place her from Emily's school. The name sounded vaguely familiar, perhaps mentioned in passing as one of the quiet kids in Emily's class. Emily turned to her parents with a hint of defensiveness. "Samantha's in my science class. She sits in the back. No one really talks to her either." The two girls looked at each other with a mixture of wariness and newfound respect, like two explorers who had unexpectedly discovered they were mapping the same uncharted territory. "You've been coming here alone?" Wilson asked Samantha, professional concern overriding his amazement at finding a second child in the unmapped cave system. Samantha nodded, her expression suggesting she expected to be scolded. "I saw Emily disappear behind the big fallen redwood 3 weeks ago. I followed her and found the entrance. Since then, I've been studying her methods." She glanced at Emily. "You're really good at this. Your classifications are way more advanced than mine." Emily's face registered genuine surprise, followed by what Jessica recognized as her first real smile in months. "You're interested in geology too? No one at school ever cares about my rocks." "I always wanted to ask you about them," Samantha admitted quietly. "But Madison and her friends would have made fun of me too." The simple exchange revealed volumes about the social dynamics both girls had been navigating, the silent solidarity of outsiders who had each believed themselves to be completely alone. Michael stepped forward, his expression a mixture of relief at finding another child alive and disbelief at the situation. "Samantha, do your parents know where you are? There's a massive search operation going on for Emily." The girl's eyes widened. "For Emily? But I saw her leaving markers. I thought everyone knew she was doing research down here." A distant rumble interrupted their conversation, followed by the unmistakable sound of rushing water growing louder in one of the connecting passages. Brooks, who had been examining the chamber for possible exits, returned with a grim expression. "Whatever's happening with the storm above, it's getting worse," he reported. "That passage we came through is starting to flood. We need to find another way out immediately." The rising danger refocused everyone's attention. Emily looked at Samantha with sudden hope. "You've been exploring different sections than me. Have you found any other ways to the surface?" Samantha nodded eagerly, pleased to contribute. "There's a tunnel system that slopes upward, behind the crystal column." She pointed to a massive formation at the far side of the chamber. "I haven't gone all the way to the end, because it gets really narrow, but there's definitely fresh air coming through." Emily turned to Wilson. "That has to be our best option. The way we came in is flooding, and my main exit route is blocked by the collapse we heard earlier." The ranger nodded, making a quick decision. "Lead the way, both of you. You know this system better than any of us." This unexpected role reversal, the children leading the adults, created a palpable shift in the group dynamic. Jessica watched as Emily and Samantha conferred briefly, examining a rough map Samantha had sketched in her notebook, their heads bent together in serious consultation. "This way," Emily finally announced, gesturing toward a narrow passage behind the towering crystal formation. "Samantha says it's tight in places, but it definitely heads upward." As the group prepared to move, Jessica noticed her daughter gathering her research materials with meticulous care, even as the sounds of rising water grew louder. "Emily, honey, we need to leave now," she urged. "The specimens can be replaced." Emily shook her head firmly. "This is important, Mom. Really important. These could be undocumented species. I need to preserve the evidence." Jessica was about to insist when she recognized the determination in her daughter's eyes, the same look she had seen in the mirror countless times when faced with a challenging design project that others thought impossible. Instead of demanding Emily leave her collection behind, Jessica knelt and helped her secure the specimens in waterproof containers from her backpack. "You're right," she said quietly. "This is your discovery. Let's make sure it's properly documented." The surprise and gratitude in Emily's expression made Jessica's heart ache with regret for all the times she had dismissed her daughter's passion as a phase to be outgrown. The passage Samantha had identified proved to be their most challenging yet. It began wide enough for comfortable progress, but quickly narrowed to a claustrophobic squeeze that had Jessica fighting panic with each breath. Her injured shoulder screamed in protest as she contorted her body to navigate the increasingly tight space. "The ceiling drops here," Emily called back from the lead position. "Everyone needs to crawl for about 10 feet. Jessica gritted her teeth and followed, focusing on Emily's small form ahead rather than the oppressive rock pressing in from all sides. The blue-green bioluminescence had faded in this section, leaving them dependent on their failing lights and touch to navigate. After what felt like an eternity of painful progress, the passage suddenly widened, allowing them to stand again. Fresh air currents caressed their faces, bringing with it the unmistakable scent of rain-soaked earth. "We must be close to the surface," Wilson observed, his voice tight with controlled hope. The tunnel continued to slope upward, growing steadily wider. Small rivulets of water trickled down the walls, suggesting they were approaching the water table influenced by the storm above. The fresh air grew stronger, carrying the distant sound of rainfall. Emily and Samantha hurried ahead, their excitement palpable as they sensed the proximity of the surface. Rounding a final bend, they found themselves facing what appeared to be a solid rock wall with tiny cracks allowing slender beams of natural light to penetrate the darkness. "No," Emily exclaimed, her voice breaking with disappointment. "This was open yesterday. I came this way." Jessica caught up to find her daughter pressing her hands against the apparent dead end, her expression devastated. Samantha was equally dismayed, running her fingers along the edges of the wall. "There was a gap here," Samantha confirmed, "wide enough to squeeze through. I saw daylight on the other side." Wilson examined the barrier carefully, shining his light along its edges. "This looks like a recent collapse," he concluded, "probably triggered by the same tremors we've been feeling. The storm might have saturated the ground, destabilizing the entire area." The crushing reality settled over the group. They had found what should have been their escape route, only to discover it sealed by tons of compacted earth and stone. Behind them, the sounds of rising water grew steadily louder, a constant reminder that their previous path was likely submerged by now. Emily stared at the blockage, her first moment of genuine fear evident as scientific certainty gave way to the realization of their predicament. "I don't understand," she murmured, her voice small. "It was open yesterday." Emily stared at the blockage, her small shoulders slumping in defeat. "I don't understand," she repeated, her scientist's certainty wavering for the first time. "It was open yesterday." Jessica examined the wall of collapsed earth and stone, fighting against the despair threatening to overwhelm her. The fresh air seeping through tiny cracks confirmed they were tantalizingly close to the surface, yet separated from safety by an impenetrable barrier. Behind them, the sound of rushing water echoed through the passages, steadily growing louder. "There has to be another way," Michael said, his voice strained with forced optimism. "We didn't come this far to give up now." Wilson and Brooks were already examining the barrier with professional scrutiny, testing various sections for weakness. Brooks pressed his ear against the wall, listening intently. "The collapse seems relatively shallow," he reported. "I can hear the storm clearly. We might be able to dig through." Emily moved closer to the wall, her geologist's eye assessing the composition of the barrier. "It's mostly compacted soil and smaller rocks," she confirmed, running her fingers along the surface. "Not solid bedrock. The rain probably saturated the hillside and caused a mudslide that sealed the exit." Jessica watched her daughter analyze the situation with such clinical precision. This child, who had always seen the world through a scientist's eyes, even in moments of danger. A surge of clarity cut through her fear. If they were going to escape, it would be by embracing Emily's knowledge, not dismissing it as she had so often done before. "Emily," Jessica said, moving forward despite the pain in her shoulder, "if we wanted to safely dig through this, how would we do it? What would be the most stable approach?" The question caught Emily by surprise. She looked at her mother with momentary confusion, then straightened with newfound purpose. This was her domain, a puzzle of geological forces, structures, and pressures. "We'd need to determine where the primary weight is distributed," Emily explained, immediately shifting into teaching mode. "See these darker streaks? They indicate where water is filtering through, which means those sections are less compacted. We shouldn't dig there. It could trigger another collapse." Wilson nodded with professional respect. "Where would you start then?" Emily pointed confidently to a section near the right edge of the barrier. "Here, the coloration suggests this area is drier and more stable. We should create a small tunnel, rather than trying to remove the entire blockage." Following Emily's guidance, they began carefully removing soil and small rocks from the section she had identified. Brooks used a small camp shovel from his emergency pack, while Michael and Wilson worked with their hands, passing debris back to Jessica and the girls, who cleared it away from the work area. As they dug deeper, the air current grew stronger, bringing the unmistakable scent of rain-soaked forest. Emily monitored their progress with intense concentration, occasionally redirecting their efforts when she spotted concerning signs in the structure of the collapsing tunnel. "Stop," she commanded suddenly, as a shower of soil cascaded from the ceiling of their shallow tunnel. We need to reinforce this section before continuing. Using techniques that Emily directed, knowledge gleaned from her extensive reading about mining and tunnel construction, they stabilized the passage using pieces of broken stalagmites as impromptu support beams. Jessica marveled at her daughter's calm authority, the same girl who had struggled to speak up in class now confidently directing a team of adults in a life-or-death situation. After nearly 40 minutes of methodical work, Wilson's hand thrust through the barrier, encountering empty space beyond. "We've got an opening," he announced, renewed energy in his voice. They quickly widened the hole until it was large enough for a person to crawl through. Fresh air rushed in, carrying the sound of pouring rain and distant thunder. Wilson went first, carefully navigating the narrow tunnel they had created, emerging onto the forested hillside outside. One by one they followed, with Jessica insisting that Emily go ahead of her despite the girl's protests. When Jessica finally crawled through the opening, the sensation of rain on her face felt like a blessing despite the storm's intensity. They had emerged on a steep, muddy slope surrounded by towering redwoods, the forest floor covered in ferns now flattened by the downpour. The relief of open space after hours in the confined darkness of the cave was overwhelming. "We need to contact the search teams," Wilson said, already attempting to use his radio, which finally connected now that they were above ground. "Base, this is Wilson. We have recovered both children and are on the surface. I repeat, we have both children and require medical evacuation." The response was immediate, filled with relief and a flurry of coordinated activity. Their location was pinpointed, and Wilson was informed that a rescue team was already in the vicinity, less than half a mile away. As they waited for extraction, huddled beneath the partial shelter of a massive redwood, Jessica observed Emily and Samantha sitting together on a fallen log, their heads bent over Emily's notebook as they compared observations about the cave system. Despite their ordeal, both girls were animatedly discussing their discoveries, seemingly oblivious to the rain soaking their already muddy clothes. "She's remarkable," Michael said quietly, coming to stand beside Jessica. "All this time, I thought I was protecting her by taking her on those hikes, giving her space to be herself away from social pressures. I never realized she was using those opportunities to prepare for her own scientific expedition." Jessica nodded, wincing as she shifted her injured shoulder. "I was so focused on trying to make her fit in that I completely missed who she already was. She doesn't need fixing, Michael. She needs recognition." The search team found them 20 minutes later, bringing emergency medical supplies, dry blankets, and overwhelming relief. As a paramedic examined Jessica's shoulder, confirming it was likely dislocated, she kept her eyes on Emily. Her daughter was earnestly explaining her discoveries to a fascinated rescue worker, pointing to her notebook of observations with unmistakable pride. 3 months passed quickly. Emily's discovery of the bioluminescent fungus and previously undocumented crystal formations in the Redwood Cave system had created a stir in the scientific community. What began as a child's solo expedition had transformed into a collaborative research project between the National Park Service, university geologists, and a very proud 12-year-old amateur scientist. On a clear spring morning, Jessica and Michael stood at the entrance to the visitor center, watching as Emily carefully adjusted her new official Junior Ranger vest. The renovated center now featured a prominent display about the Thompson Cave system, complete with photographs, samples, and detailed maps created with Emily's input. "Ready for your first official tour?" Jessica asked, straightening Emily's collar. Emily nodded, her expression serious but eyes bright with anticipation. "I've prepared notes on all the geological formations visitors might ask about," she said, patting the small notebook in her pocket, a new one, professionally bound with "Field Geologist" embossed on the cover, a gift from Wilson. Through the visitor center windows, Jessica could see a small group gathering, mostly children Emily's age, many of whom had been specifically invited after expressing interest in geology or science at local schools. Among them was Samantha, now Emily's closest friend and research partner, their shared passion for the underground world having formed a bond stronger than any conventional social connection. Ranger Wilson approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile as he saw Emily's meticulous preparation. In the months since the cave incident, he had become a mentor to both girls, helping them develop their observations into proper scientific documentation. "The exploration team is ready when you are, Ms. Thompson," he said formally, giving Emily the respect a colleague deserved rather than the condescension an adult might typically show a child. Emily took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. "Let's go then." Jessica and Michael followed at a distance as Emily led her first official educational tour of the cave's safe upper chambers, which had been properly surveyed and secured for visitors. The way their daughter transformed in this setting never ceased to amaze them. The hesitant, socially awkward girl became articulate, confident, and engaged when sharing her knowledge of geological formations. "The most fascinating aspect of limestone caves," Emily was explaining to the attentive group of children, "is that they're constantly changing. What looks like solid stone is actually dynamic. Water, minerals, and even living organisms like the bioluminescent fungi we discovered are continuously reshaping the environment." One of the children, a boy who had previously been one of Emily's tormentors at school, raised his hand with genuine curiosity. "How did you know where to look for the undocumented chambers?" Emily smiled, no longer intimidated. "I observed patterns. Nature leaves clues if you know how to read them. The air currents, the mineral deposits, the subtle changes in rock coloration, they all tell a story about what might lie beyond." As the tour continued deeper into the approved section of the cave system, Jessica hung back with Michael, watching their daughter blossom in her element. The specialists had confirmed that Emily's fungus was indeed a previously undocumented species, now officially named Mycena emiliae in her honor. "We almost lost her," Jessica whispered, not referring to the physical danger, but to the deeper risk of Emily losing herself by trying to become someone she wasn't. "But we didn't," Michael replied, squeezing her hand. "Instead, we found her, the real her." At the conclusion of the tour, Emily gathered her group in the newly designated Discovery Chamber, where special lighting had been installed to safely showcase some of the unique formations without damaging them. The children sat in a circle on specially placed mats as Emily explained how geological processes had created the spectacular features surrounding them. "People are like caves," Emily concluded, her voice echoing slightly in the underground space. "The most beautiful parts are hidden, waiting for someone brave enough to explore the darkness."